Hey everyone, welcome back to Gimme Growth. We're here with Adam Lovallo, who's the co-founder of Grow.co, and he's also a VC at Primary Venture Partners. He has a very eclectic background, being the co-founder of Course Report and also the head of acquisition for Living Social. So he's pretty much seen the whole spectrum, everything from practitioner to founder to VC. I wanted to invite Adam today to chat because he really understands the growth landscape through his community, Grow.co, at a real bird's eye angle. Today's specific topic, which I think is one of the most important topics for early stage startups, is list building. Adam has built a remarkable list with Grow.co. And I'm pretty sure everybody's heard of Grow.co, but Adam, this is probably a good place to kick it off. Do you want to just give everybody a little bit of background about yourself and Grow.co and what you're up to?
Sure. So I got into this space through my experience at Living Social. So I actually started at Living Social when I was 19.
Wow.
The four co-founders hired me as an intern, and then the company grew and grew and grew. Mm-hmm. So along the way, I had the opportunity to be in charge of what we at the time called the customer acquisition team, but was really effectively the growth team or online marketing, whatever you want to call it. So at Living Social, we focused heavily, at least my team focused heavily really on paid acquisition. One, that was a big part of the strategy, for better or worse, referral programs. And at the end of the day, it was largely essentially a large email driven business. So we had even a whole team just really focused on email specifically as a channel. And then as the company evolved and the app stores sort of arrived on the scene, the mobile app aspect of the business became more and more important. So that was my Living Social days. After Living Social, I hooked up with my friend Jay, who eventually became my partner in Grow.co. And, it was pretty straightforward thesis. Basically, when I was doing the job at Living Social, I didn't feel like there was really a community, specifically an events-centric community for people working in growth roles that had more of a performance or direct response sort of mindset. Mm-hmm. I think the advent of people with the growth moniker or title is a relatively new thing in the industry. A lot of what quote unquote growth people do in their day jobs is essentially the same thing as what people did in their day jobs 10 years ago when they had online marketing titles or digital titles. But I think there's something unique to growth people, and as is evidenced by this course, as more of I think of it as more of a cross-functional skill set, basically. So with Grow.co, we do events. That's the core business. We sell tickets and sponsorships and so on. And in addition to the events, we have a weekly newsletter, which we're going to talk about more here. We have a couple online communities. They're really Google groups, one focused on subscription businesses and another focused on mobile apps. And really the way I approach it is I just try to, think of the topics and the subject matter and the formats that would have been useful to me when I was at Living Social. And I'm like, hey, okay, so that's the target audience. Obviously the industry continues to evolve and we try to stay current. But yeah, that's the Grow.co business.
That's a great backstory. Yeah. When you and Jay linked up, I should say, how did you guys go about getting the first, outside of friends and family, outside of your personal network, which I'm sure at that point you already had probably a lot of vendors that were trying to pitch to you that you could talk to, a lot of coworkers, peers, but how did you start the engine of actually collecting emails?
So yeah, first of all, the personal network was a big part of this. Obviously, people I met when I was still working in the industry day to day were the first people I emailed saying, hey, you should check out this thing. For us, it's really like a classic sort of two-sided business where we have sponsors and we have attendees, if you will, and marketers. So I'll focus primarily on the marketer side. Ours is a relatively small target audience. I mean, people working in growth roles at consumer-facing brands with some amount of scale. I mean, there's not a lot of people who would self-identify in that category. So it lends itself, such a situation for us, lended itself to really just cold one-to-one outreach. So in a lot of cases, it was It was just finding the right people in the right role, connecting to them through either mutual connections or just leveraging the relationships that I knew they had. So for instance, brand X clearly works with Optimizely, as evidenced by the JavaScript tag on their site. I know somebody at Optimizely. I say, hey, do you know anybody at brand X? And I would go in kind of cold or sort of lukewarm, I guess. And that's really where it started. Subsequent to that kind of initial burst, we started using hosting local meetups. And that was also a big driver for us, and just in terms of awareness and list growth. But yeah, for such a niche thing, I think it makes sense to do what I guess is like a not particularly scalable tactic of just like making a list of 1,000 people and just trying to find those people. And honestly, we have a pretty good selling proposition in that it's like, hey, here's an event and community that's like made for you, that's better than the alternatives. Do you want to come to this thing? That's not a big ask. So we had that going for us.
So it sounds like it all started with events, and largely it was cold outreach. Like you knew specifically who you wanted to come to that. You had warm intros or lukewarm intros, and then you would also do meetups to find people who are like, you would meet the demand.
Yeah.
They were looking for that. And then would you do cold emails out to people if you couldn't get an intro or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean so we had a whole process, sort of a classic growthhackers.com style process of, well, we make a list of people, we find the right people, we try to scrape their emails, guess the emails, send them cold stuff. We would use like a tool like SendBloom or something like that to send automated follow-ups. And to be honest, the reality is when you really look through the step-by-step conversion rates, that approach like did not work for us. And so, we say, here's a list of 1,000 companies. We can identify the right people on LinkedIn for 900 of them. We can find the right emails for 50% of those. So you're down to 450. We get a 30% open rate on the emails of that. We get a 5% click rate, and very rapidly we would take 1,000, large scale consumer companies, and we're actually having conversations with 10 or 15 people. And of those, a couple attend the events. And that's not viable when it's not a huge market. Like we need more of those people to be aware of our stuff. So I totally get why that sort of kind of quasi-automated, quasi-personal, but not really outreach can work, particularly in a much larger industry. But I was all about it until I kind of saw like, hey, the conversion rates are not great. So what worked a lot better for us is leveraging the relationships we had. And instead of going to one of our partners and saying, hey, on the sponsor side, hey, send this to your target audience. Instead, I would start to be much more explicit and say, hey, I know you work with blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah out of your hundreds of clients. Okay. Do you think they would be interested in joining our community, joining our Google group, coming to a meetup, whatever, as an initial sort of entry point? And that math worked a lot better. Like, there was a 75% chance that the people would engage with that approach, even though I was only really reaching out to like 5 at a time or 3 at a time. Okay, cool. So that's leveraging your partners, but giving them like a very specific call to action. I think that is Living Social, Grow.co, the course part, that is like a universal truth, at least based on my experience. Like open-ended asks very rarely like lead to a specific outcome, and specific stuff, it just frames the action for whomever you're asking to do something so much more discreetly that they're much more likely to do it.
Yep. Okay, cool. So events now, in terms of the actual Grow.co newsletter, it sounds like basically you would just put everybody who came to an event, came to a meetup, did you have a landing page there that like specific, that was like, there were people that hadn't actually been to an event and actually hadn't been to a meetup yet?
Yeah. So the grow.co site as it exists today is a pretty basic WordPress site that I myself built.
Okay.
And that's why it's so shitty. New site coming soon. But effectively, it acts as an email capture funnel. So we have a standard, hey, give us your email. We have the classic exit pop. Hey, don't leave before you give us your email. But I've never really explicitly promoted the list. So the way we've grown it was we did an event and we took the full list of attendees. It was an event in New York. We had maybe 300 attendees. We just jammed them into this newsletter. So, questionable about whether or not that was really permissible, but let's say it was. And then that was about 2 years ago. And I know that because we do it weekly. So we just did an issue 110 or something. Wow. And that list now has maybe 15,000 or so people.
Okay.
But I never went out and, did any paid promotion. I never really even promoted it on relevant forums or parts of the community. And that was kind of deliberate. I really, really, really tried to make it super content centric. And I wanted it to grow solely, if not primarily maybe, through referrals. Because for us, just having something of quality for such a small target audience is much more important than having a large list. Like there are many, I call them influencers, I guess, who write about digital marketing, but they have a really large target audience. So, they care about having a list of 50 or 100,000 people who are interested in getting, 3 quick tips to make Facebook ads work. In our case, we have a much smaller target set, people working at brands with budgets and blah, 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 blah. So, we don't need a big list. We don't need to go out and go after a lot of people. We just need to go after the right people. Yeah, the site does act as a funnel. If you come to a meetup, we add you in. If you come to an event, we add you in. One thing I borrowed from Noah Kagan, AppSumo guy, is I added a little postscript to my emails, which I know a lot of people do. So P.S. I have a newsletter. Yeah, that probably is the biggest growth driver for the newsletter to date.
I was just about to ask you about that too. If some people tap on it and then they go and then they have to enter their email address.
Yeah, they just go to the landing page, and I do it on so I do a lot of stuff on my personal email and I'll obviously on the grow.co email, and probably 1 in 3 people actually thinks that I am writing a PS saying, hey, join the newsletter, and that I've explicitly done that. And it's all written. If I ever email you, you'll see this. It's all written in lowercase and it looks like I'm writing it on the fly and so on. And it totally works. Like there is no question that it works, particularly because I'm communicating with so many people all the time.
No,
so
I see
it's
that
a little thing, but it is worth doing.
Yeah. Oh, most definitely. Yeah. And then also inside the newsletter, it says, if you've been forwarded this newsletter, click here to subscribe. Have you ever thought about just letting people forward that to like a subscribe at grow.co and then it automatically adds them? So it's like easier on mobile to just like pop it over?
I've never thought about it, but I'm also very lazy. So that seems like a good idea. Another point about the newsletter with respect to growth and like focus on quality. I use the same subject line of that newsletter every single week. So I say, customer acquisition and retention issue, blah, blah, blah. Weekly rather. And there's pretty obvious like email best practice, this is a list of marketing people, right? So the probably obvious best practice there is, hey, Adam, why don't you like make the subject line more interesting? Like put a snippet from the most interesting article in the title, just do something because this is boring, really boring. And I get that feedback a lot, honestly. I have actually deliberately not done that and tried to make it sort of non-sensational or not try to follow what is essentially the best practice when it comes to subject lines, again, so as to make the point that, hey, this is really focused on the content therein. We're not gonna have articles in this newsletter, nor are we gonna feature them in the subject line that are like, 50 quick ways to get SEO wins, because that usually bullshit. So I probably take a hit up front on open rates because, it's like a boring subject line. But I honestly believe that in the long run, it is actually puts us in a better position because, subscribers build a certain expectation around what's contained therein. And they're not just being driven by quick hit, like high visibility things that are more fleeting. So yeah, it's another maybe rejection of a best practice for, I think, a good reason, but your example is maybe just sheer laziness.
Well, I think that the subject line thing, like the incrementality of open rate is probably, like you mentioned, is probably up and to the right on a rise. I know it's always the first, it is a boring subject line, but it's always the first email I open when I see it. It's when it's in my inbox, because I know that it's a good curation of content that's probably good. So that leads us into, I should say that there's never at least one article that I find in there that I don't get something valuable out of, right?
Okay.
So that's a rewarding behavior. So that's like one thing that I wanted to touch about too, is like when you were starting to build, when did you make the decision to cross over and actually start doing a newsletter that had no clear like sales value for you necessarily?
Yeah.
And did you curate content for a little while before that, or did you just one week kind of be like, hey, like I'm going to find 7 articles, I'm going to blast it out, and I'm going to see how people respond? Like, what was the point?
It's a good question. So we spent a year trying to figure out like what we were doing, and we finally were like, we should this is probably going to be an events business. We should do an event, and we finally did that. And then, we're trying to figure out, we were really not sure, like, should we be doing classes like this? Should we be doing research? Like all kinds of stuff. And then eventually we said, you know what? We should be doing events. This newsletter thing is not original in any way. If you look particularly in, obviously there's all kinds of newsletters that have gone on for a long time, but specifically this format with this look and feel are super common in the development world. So Web Development Weekly, iOS Weekly, JavaScript Weekly. Some of these things are on issue 600. Like people have been doing them forever. So I read all these things. I find them pretty interesting, at least some subset of them that we actually know they're talking about. And I was like, you know what? Like, why don't we could just do that? Like that, there is value there. And people clearly like that format. So one day I was just like, screw it. Like, let's just do it. I did a little coding on the site to support publishing them there. We initially were using MailChimp, nothing fancy. And we just started sending to the list that we had. So it was less like deliberate. And I just knew or felt at the time, if we could just get more awareness, more people to just know our stuff, at the end of the day, long term, that'll reflect positively on the events, which is what ultimately is most important to us. So I wish it was more of like, I think with a lot of things, I wish it was more of like a deliberate, thoughtful strategy. But the reality was I was just like trying to do stuff. This happens to be something, something that's worked, at least to date. But
that's how it happens. That's how Gimme Growth came along. I didn't plan it. It just all of a sudden I had a course.
Yeah. That's cool.
Are there, how did you, it sounds like you didn't do a whole lot of subject line, like not subject line testing, but value, like prop testing. It basically, like the name explains itself.
Yep. And you asked, did I curate stuff? I mean, no. Like the way we get content into this thing is I subscribe to, a couple hundred blogs around the web. I have a simple RSS reader. I scan those. I pick things that are interesting to me. Done. I mean, that's it. Lately, the only tweak is we now have an increasingly relatively active community, particularly in the mobile app space. So lots of people posting and stuff. And I just moderate. I'm not doing the job day to day anymore. But through moderation and reading all of the comments, I have the opportunity to stay up to date on stuff. So I now increasingly will grab articles referred to by people in the community or things they're talking about and go track stuff down as a feeder into the newsletter. Because our community has maybe 1,000 people in the mobile app group. For instance, the newsletter is a much broader distribution. So that's been super valuable because then it's like you have, I don't really think of these people as users, but you have people who are like in the mix who are giving, that are maybe the most engaged, who you can help leverage to to share stuff with the people who are maybe less engaged, like just newsletter subscribers.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's no beyond that. It's pretty basic. And honestly, I think that's probably how most of these weekly newsletters work in all of these verticals. And since we're talking about it in the context of this course, and I know all your students have various businesses they're working on, I honestly think it's like almost a universal tactic to use in almost any context. So my other business, which is Course Report, it's like a random ratings review site for coding boot camps. They basically do the exact same thing. I mean, it looks and feels different, but the structure is the same. It's a weekly cadence. They highlight things that are interesting. They do more original writing than I do. But like, I think it's a model that is very replicatable and is, generally speaking, a value add to any other communication that you do, and doesn't require that much effort, to be honest.
That's very true. Yeah. So this is a great way to get started with content too, to see what people are actually interested in before developing a lot of your art. And
with the coding bootcamp site, like, we interview people who have gone to coding boot camps, and the newsletter is like, here are the interviews we conducted. And guess what? That's exactly what the audience wants to read. Like it's not rocket science. And so in almost every vertical, I think you could play to that. It's just a matter of what people in the target audience are most interested in, and just give them more of that on a consistent basis. Because I think the fact that it's a periodical is important to build like awareness over time.
Yeah, I think two really important points that may sound obvious are, it's not rocket science, and sometimes when it seems that simple, you're like, oh, it can't be this easy. It's just I'm not going to do it. And then there's also I don't know if you still use MailChimp or not, but if you remember how like before pressing send, like Freddie's finger would come down the animation and the sweat. There's just like kind of that fear of like sending something out to all these people and seeming stupid, you know. How did you kind of get over that? You just did it, and then you saw that there was good response, and then got confident in it and got excited. And
yeah, I mean, one fun thing that we do, because again, our audience of people who are doing marketing jobs, is we post the open and click rates on the email every week at the bottom of the email. No normal people would give a shit about that. No one on the planet would care about that, except if you are an online marketing. I get feedback all the time. When I mention the newsletter to someone, or someone mentions it to me, the first thing they say is, hey, I love how you put the open rate in the email. That is like the funnest thing. I love why. I always look if it's going up or down. Sometimes I'll post when the open rate drops, because we occasionally have issues with Gmail permission tabs and spam, whatever. And I'll get emails like, "Oh, what's wrong, Adam? Are you doing okay? Like, what's wrong with you over there?" That's a fun little thing. But once I started to get more and more of that feedback, I was like, okay, this is a thing. This is a thing that's worth doing. And honestly, like, we'll see where our business goes. We'll see if we do more events or less events or whatever. But like, it's hard for me to imagine not doing it almost into perpetuity, because I enjoy it. People generally like it. I get a lot out of it in terms of like getting to read all these articles. And I think I add value to the subscribers. So, it's a total win. And again, on the Course Report side, they get comparable. We get good open rates. We get 40 to 50% open rates, 15 to 20% click-through rates. That's quite good.
Yep.
The Course Report site has a larger list, and the numbers are pretty similar. So it's possible to have that list is maybe 50,000 people or something, 30 to 50,000. But it's possible to have a consistent message with a really healthy open rate if you're really, delivering. I think at Living Social, we had a much different email strategy. I can tell you that the open and click-through rates were fractional compared to those numbers.
Well, that's a natural lead into my next question, which is essentially, how do you protect your list, right? So like, one of the things that you've done a really good job about doing is not promoting. You do promote some things, like when you have an event, of course, you do like let people know when there's like cool things, like you shared Gimme Growth, which was awesome. Thank you for doing that. But it's, where did you draw the line between, kind of like going out and building partnerships, or it's like, we'll share our list if you share yours, and we'll promote. How did you know so early on to do that? And what is your guideline to best practices there?
Okay, so I'll answer this question from a Living Social perspective and the Grow.co perspective. So Living Social is more of consumer business, a large volume. We had we were constantly battling to get emails into the inbox, right? It's like a constant struggle. Sending billions of messages a month, literally.
Yeah.
That's a lot. And our guy at the time, a friend of mine still, Ken, who's our email delivery guy, was and is one of the best in the industry, and he helped us do that. So we had all kinds of problems that I think are more likely to be experienced by consumer facing, higher growth startups, like making sure the list was clean, making sure that we would move people up and down based on their level of activity in terms of send frequency, because we wanted to keep our complaint rates low. We want to keep the unsub rates low. And that is a battle.
Yeah.
The rule of thumb was, at the end of the day, one, if we saw people with lower activity after a reasonable amount of time, 90 days, we just started bumping them way, way, way back in terms of frequency. That's a good rule of thumb. Two, okay, you do as much upfront validation as you can. There are lots of like Ruby gems or other whatever plugins and stuff that can help you do validation, just so that you aren't getting what are clearly fake email addresses. So one of the biggest things that would catch stuff for us in social was, length. So something that's a email with domain that's super short or super, super long, because that's people just like holding down the Z button, right?
Yeah.
The extreme solution is to do like a second step of authentication, confirm your email address. I personally think that's a tough pill to swallow for a lot of consumer brands. The drop off you take there is massive. And I think it's a manageable thing without having to do that. Obviously, in certain instances, it's like a completely natural thing to do that confirmed opt-in, COI, as they call it. Mm-hmm. But in a lot of cases, like, hey, get updates on future sales on our site. Like, sending a confirmation email is like an abnormal experience. So I don't recommend it. So that's one. Now on the Grow.co side, it's a lot easier. Like, we still do opt people down. So I don't know exactly what the rule is, but I think it's something like 90 days. We'll take people back to a monthly send versus a weekly, right? So if we don't see any activity for 90 days, we'll put you onto a monthly. And then if we see any activity on the monthly, then we graduate you back to the weekly. And that's, a common practice. I think that's like works for us. It probably would work for a lot of people depending on the frequency at which you're sending. But even with the newsletter that gets a 40 to 50% open rate, really high click-through rate, almost no unsubs, even still sometimes we end up in people's promotion tabs or on occasion in spam, depending on the email service provider, although lots of our people are on either personal Gmails or corporate Gmail. Yeah. So, it's like, it's never ending battle. You will end up getting balked, as they say, sometimes. But I think best practice would be just to have some perspective on graduating people up and down. That's the safest way to do it. Obviously, you need to respect unsubs and blah, 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 blah. Obvious. But that's worked for us. We had a lot of trouble early on. We had a couple weeks where we just kept hitting getting bulked. Like a large percentage of our email sends we're getting bulked. Lately, it's been better. But we're fortunate again in that we have a marketing centric audience. So when people see stuff like that, they send it to me and say, hey, you're having a problem with Yahoo. Like, what's up with that?
Yahoo's the worst.
Yeah. Well, yeah, for maybe many reasons, sadly. But yeah, so I know you have all different types of students and all different sorts of verticals. I would just say the biggest thing is have at Living Social, the people who we would opt out or opt down, we would keep them in a cohort, right? And we would look at their total purchase behavior on an ongoing basis. And we would keep a subset of those people who we were going to opt down at the regular volume. So we would control. Mm-hmm. And we saw, in some cases, more purchase activity from the people we opted down or out than from the people we kept sending the same amount of volume. Because, that cohort was just not responding to email. That was not the driver for their behavior. So it can be a scary thing. And sometimes sometimes in my career, the people on the email delivery side of the coin, I think their initial sort of reflexive tendency is to be too aggressive. So it was often, we would try to find some middle ground, but it's definitely possible to be sort of thoughtful about how frequently you send to people, without really endangering any activity or sales or, anything. You just have to be kind of surgical about it, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's really good. So speaking of surgery, Living Social, of course, had an entire team of people that were able to create systems and do all this stuff. I don't imagine that you have that. So
no.
Are you doing this in an automated, the opt down and up back up and automated?
Not really. I mean, we use a standard DSP just like anybody else. We've tried a whole host of them. The moment it's Campaign Monitor, we've used MailChimp before. No, we write a simple rule within the tool, any activity within the last 90 days, bang, select, apply to this list, any activity on this send, okay, bang, upgrade up to the next list. Nothing fancy.
Cool.
At Living Social, you're right. It was extremely complicated, particularly because at that volume, you start dealing with mailing from specific IP addresses, which is a whole issue. And maybe a common strategy is to put like depending on how many IPs you have, like the better subscribers are sent from one spot and the worst subscribers are sent from another spot, so that the service providers, the email service providers, like can see like who's who and what's quality or not. But yeah, that's like a 1%er type problem. I think our approach on Grow.co works for most things. We do the same thing on Course Report, nothing fancy. And we use customer.io as the ESP there. Okay, cool.
Yeah, this is all super helpful. I'm just scanning the list right now to see if there's any other questions. I mean, I was going to ask you about the double opt-in thing. I'm glad you kind of brought that up. I know some people swear by it, but I think that like rather than saying yes, double opt-in works or not, my rule of thumb is usually that if you see like large amounts of unsubscribes on the first couple emails, then you might want to experiment whether to start it. Would you agree with that?
I think that's reasonable. It's a situational thing. Like particularly if you're willing in the product to make the fact that a confirmation is required a very visible thing, i.e. immediately after taking someone's email, take the full screen and put an overlay and say, hey, you better go confirm. Here's a link to take you into your inbox. Like that sort of stuff works for me. But there are a lot of instances where, it doesn't, in my opinion, doesn't make sense. And you can really manage the risk on the back end as opposed to up front. But yeah, some people are very passionate about COI or confirmed opt-in all the time.
Now, how did you, I was going to ask you, what is the next conference that you have coming up?
So we have a December 8th event called Growth Stack in San Francisco. So the premise is it's like about hiring and process, like how you manage the growth process and team, and then also tools and services, thus the stack part. And then our big event is annually in May, and we call that Mobile Apps Unlocked. And that's kind of like an all thing mobile apps marketing event. And that's by a long shot our largest event, and frankly I think our best. But that's so I'm beginning to plan that. That's 7 months away or something.
Yeah, this is a big task. Yeah. I'll definitely come to the San Francisco one. The mobile one's going to be in Las Vegas again.
Yes, we'll do Las Vegas, and then we'll have the New York event in the fall, most likely.
Okay, awesome. What else? Oh, did I ever tell you that I tried to buy Grow.co before you even had it?
No, you didn't.
For Talkable, we were going to change our name to Grow.
Oh yeah,
and it was like, I don't know what happened, but like it didn't fall through. It fell through, and I'm really glad you guys got it because it's a much better, like it's a broader, bigger purpose.
Yes. I can say that we probably every 2 to 3 months get an inbound from some ad tech somebody saying, "Hey, we're launching a new thing. We want to be Grow.co."
Nope.
Nah. But yeah, no, that credit to my co-founder on that one.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, cool. Well, hey, this was super helpful. I'm going to document all this out. Culmination of this is going to be like a practical exercise that people can use to kind of get started with list building. Cool. If they haven't already, or optimize what they're doing. Anything else that you'd like to add in, or final thoughts, or you think you covered it all pretty much?
No, I mean, I'll just say if I encourage people to check out the newsletter. Feel free to email me. I'm happy to talk about this stuff. I haven't had a real job in some time, so I've got time to answer emails. On the community side, if you're in the subscription space or mobile app space, you can come to the site. There's a form to fill out. You can join these forums, and they're actually pretty active, which I'm quite happy about. So that's another thing.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'll definitely we'll definitely let everybody know about all of that. What I forgot, I wanted to ask you, the VC thing is new. What is this?
Well, yeah. So that's a little bit of sleight of hand. So I am a EIR, whatever that means, at what is a really, really cool fund, small, mostly consumer and to a lesser extent SaaS-centric fund in New York. So I am supposed to be coming up with the next big thing. We'll see, and helping the slightest amount, with some of the inbound deals and portfolio companies. But yeah, that's a new thing for me. But I remain a constant event organizer, as that job never ends. So
yes, totally.
Yeah,
well, that's awesome. All right, man. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate the time, and we'll be in touch shortly.
Okay, my pleasure.
Right.
My pleasure.
Bye-bye.
All right, later.